I do have one request.
Sure.
Somewhere in there, we've got to have a Wilheimer scream.
Okay. Well, we can.
Ah!
We'll open the episode with it, and then it's like, hello. Hello. Welcome to Tampon Talk with Mary. Welcome to the show that only airs once a month. Quick story. So, listeners have been updated on my current process of how my period is going. I've been trying to find ways to treat the pain that I have once a month because it's just terrible. So my gynecologist was like, well, maybe try a TENS unit because I don't really want to get on certain birth controls yet because I don't know enough about it or whatever. And it's like, okay. So I tried it recently and I went to go move one of the patches while the product was on like an idiot and put static electricity all throughout my arm and just couldn't use it for a moment. So I'm figuring that out, but it's great if y'all ever want to try it. But anyway, I'd love to jump right in with my two guests we have on the show. Hello, why don't we introduce ourselves? How are you guys?
Hi, I'm Alan Cash, and I never thought I would be on a show about periods. As part of my education, I'm a physicist, and it's strange where life will take you. How I got here was we started developing a product looking at anti-aging. I was at UCSD, and we were looking at ways to mimic calorie restriction. So in the animal kingdom, when we give animals 25% less than what they normally want to eat, they live about 25% longer. It's one of the only ways we know how to extend population lifespan. So, you still might get hit by a bus, but as a whole, the population lives longer. And so the question is why aren't we all calorie restricting? And the answer is because I did it for 30 days, because I study it. And my wife suggested that perhaps I should stop this, that perhaps I was just a little bit irritable. And I know that's not true, but I did stop it because eating is just so much a part of our lives, of our sociality, of the joy that we experience. And I started looking at, from a physicist's perspective, why calorie restriction increases lifespan. What can we do to mimic it? And a lot of the answers came out of MIT and Harvard at the time that I was doing this research. So it's not from me, people a lot smarter than me. And what they came up with was a compound called nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, or NAD plus specifically. And they were showing that this was a substrate for something called sirtuins, which are in red wine. And we looked at ways to increase the NAD to NADH ratio and turn on the powers of calorie restriction in animals. And we were able to do that with a nutritional supplement called oxaloacetate, which is, if you go to basic biology, oxaloacetate's part of the Krebs cycle, and it is an energy molecule that's very powerful in your body. And when we give oxaloacetate to animals, they live 25% longer without eating less, because it does some of the same basic biology that calorie restriction does. And so we came up with a nutritional supplement to sell this product. It's called Benagene, and we've been selling it successfully for many, many years. And one of my doctors came to me and he said, Alan, I had a strange experience. I had a woman who experienced angry PMS every month. And I gave her some of this Benagene to try because she's a little bit pre-diabetic, and Benagene also helps stabilize glucose levels. And so he just thought that would help her keep a healthy sugar level. And she came back the next month and she said, I didn't have my angry PMS time, the time about a week before my period. And he goes, oh, well, that's great, thinking like a guy, no big deal. And she goes, no, you don't understand. I didn't have it. This is the first time I haven't had that since I was 13 years old. And I said, wow, maybe we should look into this. And I started talking with some of my other doctors, and I said, have you seen this I called it a side effect. But it's not. It's a real positive benefit. And I kept hearing over and over again these stories where people were just feeling better. And, on an emotional side. So we thought we would take a clinical trial and run this and see if we could actually see the difference. See how oxaloacetate could possibly affect a woman's emotional state, especially right before her period. But I've kind of run on here, and I'd like to, which I will tend to do, and I want to introduce Maria Ginsberg. She's been working with us on this. Maria, why don't you say a few things, and I'll shut up for a while.
All right, will do. I have a biology background from UC Santa Barbara, and I've been working with the clinical trial data pretty much from the beginning around 2 years ago. And I am now, so I've been through both clinical trials, and I am now helping with the promotional side of things.
Wow, you were a lot briefer than I was.
Yeah.
That's usually the case.
Not a problem, though. I mean, yeah, I mean, but I love that that's the sort of where I guess it's not like it was deliberately for this purpose, but it happened. And
no, this was...
That's great.
Sometimes you're good and sometimes you're lucky. And I think your listeners are now lucky because there's a product that we've identified that was completely for another reason, increasing lifespan and increasing health span. And now we're repurposing that same product that, has been on the market for 10 years and it's got 5 million doses out there. But now we're looking at using it just for women's emotional needs right before their period. And so we decided to focus on that and do the clinical trial work to see, if this is just anecdotal stories or is this hard science that we can show these improvements. And it turns out it's hard science. Yeah. We've tried to understand why we get such a improvement, and it turns out that some of the ideas we have are turning the ideas of PMS on their head. Everybody will tell you, oh, it's your hormones. It's your hormones. It's your hormones. You can't do anything about it. It's your hormones. Well, based on what we're seeing, that's just not true. Yeah. There's been some great work at UCLA looking at what happens in the brain when women have this emotional time right before their period. And we can see that when we measure their hormone levels, the difference between women who experience anger and irritation and gloominess and anxiety, their hormone levels are exactly the same as women who don't have this issue. Yeah. There's no statistical difference. It's not the hormone levels. But what we do see is a difference in how sugar is processed. specifically in the brain. They've done PET scans of women during this time period. And what they see is in an area of the brain called the cerebellum, which is in the back bottom portion of the brain. And it previously was thought to do with just motion and body control. And a lot of old research books used to call it the lizard brain. But it's not. What we've seen now is that problems in the cerebellum relate to manic depression syndromes. It relates to psychosis. All sorts of emotional dysfunction seems to occur when there's damage in the cerebellum. And what these researchers at UCLA saw when they did PET scans of these women that had emotional issues and compared them with women that didn't have these emotional issues was that the sugar usage in the cerebellum just spiked. Just went crazy. Now, I know as a guy, when I don't have enough sugar in my brain, I get hangry. And we think this is the cause of emotional PMS with these women, that for whatever reason, they can't get enough glucose to their cerebellum during this time frame, and leads to irritation, anxiety, gloomy mood, just that wild emotional mood swings. And as basis for this, there have been clinical trials where they looked at women and gave them chocolate. Okay, you hear the anecdotal stories. It's my period, chocolate will help, and it did for a short period of time, and then because of the way our bodies process sugar, they get that glucose kick and they feel really good, and then they would crash. It's called a sugar crash. You probably heard about it. You probably experienced it. And it would make the problem worse. And they've actually done studies where they've looked at consumption of these high sugar foods and compared them with clinical depression. And they see people who eat these high sugar foods have a much higher risk of depression than those people who don't eat them. So perhaps consuming fatty, sugary foods is not the answer, because although it works for a short period of time, it creates bigger problems. So we looked at some of the biochemistry here, and what we determined is that oxaloacetate, that energy metabolite that's already in every cell of your body, well, in the liver it has a special function. It takes triglycerides, which are fatty things that circulate in our blood, and it turns it into glucose in the liver so it can feed your heart and your brain during the times that you're fasting. If it didn't do this, your heart and your brain, which require huge amounts of glucose, would shut down. Your brain is only 20% or 4%, I think, of your entire body weight, but it consumes 20% of the glucose that you eat. It needs that energy. And so what oxaloacetate does, by making a small amount available in the liver, it allows this process to take place upon demand so that glucose is produced for the brain. It's turning essentially your fat into sugar, feeding your brain, and making you feel better. And Maria, why don't you talk about what we found in the clinical trial?
So basically, in the clinical trial, we got really great results. In the first clinical trial, the results were maybe even a bit too great because we actually got people calling in and begging us not to take them off of Jubilance, which is the product, oxaloacetate. That's their PMS product. And they were begging us not to take us off the product because they knew that they weren't on placebo. And so we lost some people because it worked so well from the clinical trial. And I think that really says a lot for this product because this was back in 2016. That was, an election year. And so it was really stressful for everyone, I think, regardless of your political affiliation, especially for women. And we still got such great results from this trial. So it was just crazy. So we decided to do it again, do another clinical trial just in case. And we got really great results. We got, 54% improvement in gloominess during PMS, 36% in stress, and 51% in anxiety. So, this really made a big difference in their lives. And I'm also really happy that we were able to do the second clinical trial, get enough people to, actually finish it.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And since then, we've launched Jubilance, and it's been, kind of, a roller coaster in terms of, like, trying to get, women to try it. Because, obviously this really helps women. But unfortunately, because of the stigma around PMS and emotional PMS, women sometimes don't want to find a solution for that problem. So they either think, that it's not actually a problem. They just don't think it's a problem. Or maybe they think that, and they don't think that it's a problem. Or maybe they think that it is a problem, but there's no solution. They've just given up. Or there's even women who've internalized, what doctors might tell them and think, well, not all doctors, of course, but they think that perhaps, there is a problem, but it's a stupid problem and that they shouldn't do anything about it. They should just, get over it. Because, when you go to a doctor, a lot of times, right now at least, what you get is either they say, get over it, or take an antidepressant or birth control, which are all, of course, things you can do. But for some people, those are just not options. Not all women can take birth control or SSRIs and have it actually be good for their health. So this is just another option that they can take and see, where it goes. Because, this is a legitimate issue. You have to think about this, right? You have to divorce emotional PMS from the name and just think about the symptoms. What you get is every month, you get less energy, you get more gloominess, more stress, more anxiety, more irritation, more irritability, right? And it impacts your life negatively, right? So why are we making jokes about it? Why are we, not caring about it and not doing anything about it? It's like this, like, for example, the medical community, if you look at how people talk about, for example, sexual arousal as a medical issue, right, in men and women, right? It is not actually considered a medical condition until someone comes in and says, this bothers me. I want to fix this. This is negatively impacting my life. And then it's a medical condition, right? It's an issue that needs to be fixed. Well, if you have emotional PMS, that inherently means that it bothers you. That inherently means that it negatively affects your life. So why are we ignoring it? Why are we not talking openly about it? And I think that's another thing that's really cool, that what you're doing, because you're talking openly about periods, which, most people don't do, right? Most people don't do that. And, so you're part of this thing too, just trying to solve these kinds of issues, because if we can't talk about our problems, they're never going to be solved.
Yeah, and I really like how you really put it in that perspective of, with anything else, you can go in and say, hey, I have this problem.
Exactly.
And it's fixable, or you at least start a conversation about it. But suddenly PMS is like, oh, stay away from her for that week. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So it's like, well, it's not really fair because it's like, well, I'm, sure this week I have PMS, but you're always a jerk. So it's like, it's like, you can't treat that, but at least this is treatable, But yeah, I think, and speaking on kind of, the stigma and such, is that a great way that this show works through that is through comedy. This is a little off of what we're talking about, but I think it's a fun segment. Is I invite guests to share a tampon terror story or a boner burden story. You are more than welcome to participate. If you don't have one, totally fine.
Alan's looking at me, so I guess that means it's my turn. All right. So if we're speaking about emotional PMS, I think that it's not exactly embarrassing back then, but now that I look back at it, I kind of cringe because now I realize probably what it was. So back when I was 15, I had my first boyfriend. He was my first love. And we dated for, a very insignificant amount of time. And then we broke up, and now that I think about it, it was probably my fault because I'll explain in a moment. It was probably my fault because basically the next day, right, I stayed home from school and I was crying and just completely out of my mind in grief for this. And my sister's babysitter came home and asked me what was going on, and I went on and told her, I can't live my life without him. This is it. And she asked me, I know you're sad, but are you sure you're not PMSing? And that really made me angry, obviously. Mm-hmm. But what was funny is that the next day, my period started. So I'm pretty sure also that breakup might have had something to do with something other than the fact that I was a stupid 15-year-old. I think it might have had something to do with that. Short story right there.
We've never had a story on the show where it resulted in ending a relationship. So I could say that's a first. Oh no. I felt like when I was 15 that I just I better not burden anybody and just not date anyone until I've got my crap together.
Yeah, unfortunately, I did not have any thoughts like that back then.
But what 15-year-old girl does, so.
Apparently you.
Yeah.
Very responsible.
I feel like maybe a couple other factors probably could have contributed to why no one was, say, seeking me at the age of 15. But anyway.
I'm sure that's not true.
Stop, you're such a nice kid. So, Alan, this, you can participate or not participate in the segment if you'd like, but...
Well, I'm from an all-female household, except for me and my neutered dog. I have a wife and 3 daughters, and at least one of my daughters does have significant emotional PMS. And, before we knew about this product, you just grin and you bear it, and we got to the point where we could mark on the calendar, okay, this is why we're receiving the call from college that, is just a desperate plea for help. And, but there was nothing we could do about it. And I think for parents, that is one of the most hurtful things in the world, to hear the pain in your daughter's voice, and think that, what do I do about it? I'm a guy. First of all, I'm completely insensitive, and secondly, I don't know how to console anyone. Ask my wife. But it's just so painful, and now to know that there is potentially a way to relieve that anxiety and relieve it not with drugs, not with birth control, not with hormone shots, antidepressants, but with a nutritional supplement that originally was put on the market to increase lifespan. That's something that people need to know about, and that's why we're so thankful to be able to share this story with you, to get the word out, to say, hey, there is an option out there. The clinical trials showed amazing success in reducing these symptoms. It's not going to make everything go away, and it's not going to bring back your 15-year-old boyfriend.
Don't worry, I don't want him back. I'm good.
But if it makes life a little bit easier for yourself, so that you feel better, so that you can have these relationships with your parents, with your siblings, with your significant others, with your coworkers. I mean, I've heard stories where, some of the people in the trial would tell me that they would go home from work 3 days out of every month. And, if it was on a weekend, that was fine. But if it was during the week, they would take sick leave and just go home and hide. Because if they were around people, they were afraid that they would say something and get fired. I mean, this is a potential life-changing product. And it doesn't have to be that bad, I mean, it can be just mild emotional PMS. And just imagine if instead of a cloudy day, it was a bright sunny day, every day. So it's important to get that message out.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And I think that's what a lot of this really roots into, is that we just need compassion and empathy in order to, say, get this product out, or even just open the conversation. So it's good that we have people that want to make products that are rooted in that, is that you're having a problem that maybe I'm not having, but I have compassion and I feel
we're all just helping out each other as much as we can.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, this is such a heartfelt way to end that dumb segment I have. I love it. And you guys have kind of touched on your story a bit, but I would love to talk about, what does the market look like? How, are you guys affected by the stigma for this kind of product?
So the market for this kind of product is, I'd say honestly any woman who is busy and can't afford, to lose any time, right? Because if you're a student, for example, if you have a career or even just a very intense job, right? And you're starting your career life, you can't have emotional problems if you're just trying to get started in the world, if you're starting to, seriously date, etc., etc. There's also, mothers, obviously they also have very limited time to take off from their children. So, basically the market for this is anyone any woman who has to, just keep going no matter what. And, the stigma, it's touched us in that, like I mentioned before, a lot of women are hesitant to do anything about it, and we don't want it to be like that. You don't have to keep PMS quiet. You don't have to feel sad. And it's another way that women can work together, It's another option, kind of like when you're in the bathroom, and, you don't have a tampon, right? Mm-hmm. And you're just asking someone what do you have a tampon, and everybody just here, I have one,
Yeah.
This is another way to work together to help somebody else, because one of the benefits of this job is getting to help women that I have no idea who they are. Somebody will post on Facebook, on our page, oh my god, this helped me so much, I can't believe it, this stuff works. Somebody emails you answer back, and they say, oh my god, thank you so much, you've helped me so much. And it's so satisfying. Know that this is stretching across, multiple state lines, right? Mm-hmm. And we're helping these women. We have no idea who they are, honestly. Well, okay, we know the name and email, and we have to, know the address to send things to them. But other than that, we don't know anything about them, and yet we've made a difference in their life.
Wow. And that's great. Like, I'm saying that as a lot of the responses to all the stuff you're saying, but it truly is. Like, we don't have, I mean, women don't have this kind of thing, or they haven't had it before. Yeah. So it's good that they have it now, and it's good that it's coming, again, from, like, a place of empathy, an ethical place, you know? So I'm just really happy that you guys are doing that. It warms my heart.
Oh, thank you.
Let me see. So, we've talked about some of the challenges with the taboo. Was there, let's say, any final message or anything you could say to women or anybody like seeking this product, or any final thoughts you guys have?
Well, again, I'm a scientist, so I pull it back to, you know, is this going to work for them or is it not? And of course, the best way for them to know that is just to get a bottle and try it. We have had, just amazing success in turning around emotional PMS. Is it going to work for everyone? No, it's not. In the clinical trial, it only worked for about 80% of the women that saw statistically significant improvements over baseline. And, you know, maybe some of that was because we measured it 1 month and then we tried the product and measured it again, and then we tried the placebo, and we had a crossover where we tried both, and we didn't tell them which one was which. It's double-blinded, but as Maria intoned earlier, most of them knew. Even though we made the pills the same size, did everything possible. The bottles were exactly the same, but the results were just so significantly better with the oxaloacetate. And this is a natural product. I mean, you probably haven't heard of oxaloacetate. It's not something I was familiar with, you know, as a physicist, until I started looking at the pathways of how we produce energy in our body and how we can improve on that with nutritional supplements. So the other thing is some of the side benefits of this are, we've seen in clinical trial, in a different clinical trial, that we're measuring specifically for fatigue. And one of the things we saw was a 29% increase in endurance, or the opposite, the decrease in fatigue that we saw in the oxaloacetate group that was statistically significant over baseline that we didn't see in the placebo group. So not only we're looking at changing mood, but we're also looking at giving people a little bit more energy. And that's not surprising, seeing how this is an energy compound. But that difference can make such a difference in your life. I'll give one example. I got an email from a young lady, and she sent me like a 3-page email, you know, going on and on and on about how miserable her life was and how she was afraid she was going to lose her marriage, that she was ruining her relationships with her children, and that after the time period passed, you know, when she had her period and felt better, she didn't feel better because she was racked with guilt over what had occurred. And then she was afraid because she knew it was coming again the next month. And this was happening every month. And she just didn't know what to do. And she tried our product. And, you know, I received another email from her another month later. It's like, oh my God, this stuff is amazing. I feel like 1,000-pound weight has been lifted off my shoulders, and you know, just went on and on and on. But it was only about a page. And then 3 months later, I get another email from her, and it's like, hey, doing great, send me more. And that's the way it should be. because it shouldn't be the major focus of your life that you're miserable. It should be, hey, I found something that works. Get it to me. Hey, I got to go pick up the kids. You know, and seeing that transition, not only in her, but in all these people, just is so heartwarming. It's so incredible to be able to offer something that will possibly change their lives.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's wonderful. And I commend you guys for doing that, because
and we commend you for having this podcast, so you can talk openly about these issues. On your previous episodes, another scientist can talk about it, and so we can talk about it, so that all together we can make a difference, and also hopefully make some people laugh.
Yeah. Yeah, you guys have been such wonderful guests. So,
thank you.
Thank you for being on the show. Is there...
thank you for having us.
Of course. Is there... let's see, if you want to plug your website, any way that we can get in contact with you guys to get this product ASAP?
Yes. So you can go to jubilance.com, or you can just click on the link that will be in the description of Tampon Talk with Mary, and find out more. There's all kinds of information on our website, and if you have any questions, you can contact us and ask anything. Don't hesitate to contact us, and we would be happy to help.
Wonderful. Great. And then listeners too, is that you can email us at tampontalkwithmary@gmail.com, and if your question is to them, I will send it your guys' way, if that's okay, because I'm surely not at the capacity to speak to any degree of how great it is. I'm just here for it, and definitely I'll leave the explaining to them. You guys can also follow their social media. They have an Instagram, you guys have a Facebook,
and a Twitter.
Same. Okay.
The holy triumph.
The trifecta. We're on.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then your guys' usernames on there. Do you? So the Jubilance, I think.
Okay. So for Facebook, we have Jubilance for PMS. For Instagram, we have Jubilance for PMS1, because Jubilance is number 1. Twitter is Jubilance for PMS, and actually, turns out we also have a Pinterest. It's also Jubilance for PMS.
Oh wow! Look at that. And then listeners, follow our media. So we're Tampon Talk W Mary on, I think, everything. On Instagram and Twitter, we're Tampon Talk with Mary on Facebook. You can email us if you want me on Pinterest. So it'll just be me and Jubilance on there. Let me know. I am not enough of a white girl to explore that platform very much, but I will try. Pretty great from what I hear. Anyway, thank you guys for listening, and get Jubilance. And we'll see you next time on Tampon Talk with Mary. Keep on bleeding if you're bleeding, and if you're not, have some empathy, be as smart as Alan. Learn a little more, and we'll see you next time. Bye.